The throne room of the Valdrosian Imperium stretched 300 meters in every direction, which, quite frankly, was overkill. I had been standing in the diplomatic corps for 72 cycles, and I had never seen a species compensate this hard for something. The ceiling disappeared into manufactured storm clouds that crackled with purple lightning, because apparently subtlety died somewhere around the Third Expansion War. Supreme Commander Valthor Kree stood at the center of it all, his forearms crossed in what I assumed was meant to be an intimidating pose. It mostly made him look like he was hugging himself. His scales shimmered that peculiar shade of bronze that Valdrosians got when they were absolutely convinced they were about to do something impressive. "The human delegation will approach." His voice boomed through the chamber, amplified by technology that probably cost more than my entire planet's GDP. I watched from my position in the observer's gallery as the massive doors groaned open. These doors, by the way, were carved from the bones of some extinct megafauna and took 47 servants to operate. Again. Compensation. Every species in the diplomatic corps leaned forward. The Chixari delegation chittered nervously, their antennae twitching. The Morvathian ambassador, who looked like someone had given a blob of mercury anxiety issues, actually rippled with concern. Even the Trilaxian observers, who normally couldn't care less about anything that didn't involve their next meal, perked up their sensory stalks. Humanity had been silent for 6 months. 6 months since the Imperium had annexed the Kepler colonies, expecting the primates to roll over like every other species did. 6 months of increasingly aggressive diplomatic messages that went unanswered. 6 months of military build-up at the border that the humans seemed to completely ignore. And now, finally, they had sent someone. The footsteps echoed in the cavernous space, soft, measured, almost casual. Then she walked in, and I had to physically stop myself from laughing. The human representative was tiny, maybe 1.5 meters tall, which was downright microscopic compared to Valthor's 3-meter frame. She wore what I had learned was called a pantsuit, a boring grey affair that looked like she had picked it up from a discount store. Her hair, dark and pulled back in a simple style, showed streaks of silver. She carried a leather bag over one shoulder, the kind bureaucrats used to cart around endless paperwork. But it was her face that got me. She looked bored, not scared, not intimidated, not even particularly interested. She looked like she had been interrupted during lunch and was mildly annoyed about it. Valthor's scales darkened, which meant he was either angry or constipated. With Valdrosians, it was hard to tell. "You dare approach the Supreme Commander of the Valdrosian Imperium with such casualness?" The human woman stopped about 20 meters from the throne. She set her bag down, reached inside, and pulled out what looked like a beverage container. She took a long sip while the most powerful military leader in this arm of the galaxy stared at her. "Sorry," she said, her voice carrying perfectly despite not being amplified. "Long trip, needed coffee. You were saying something about daring?" I heard the Chixari delegation gasp. "You didn't talk to Valthor like that, you just didn't." The last ambassador who had shown insufficient deference had been vaporized, along with his entire planet, as a learning opportunity for the rest of us. Valthor's crest flared, which definitely meant anger this time. "I am Supreme Commander Valthor Kree, Master of 700 star systems, Breaker of Worlds, Supreme Leader of the Valdrosian Imperium." "That's a lot of titles," the human said, taking another sip. "Must be hell on business cards." The silence that followed could have been weaponized. "And you are?" Valthor's voice had dropped to a dangerous growl. "Pamela Wright, Human Diplomatic Service, Grade 7, currently assigned to pest control." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my survival instinct start screaming. "Though between you and me, the grading system is mostly about seniority, not actual competence. I've been doing this for 34 years, and I still can't figure out the coffee machine in the break room." "You mock me!" Valthor roared, and the purple lightning in the ceiling intensified. "You mock the Imperium." "Not yet," Pamela said, reaching into her bag again. "Give me a minute. I'm still waking up." Valthor gestured, and his honor guard, 24 of the most elite warriors in the Imperium, activated their plasma rifles. The whine of charging weapons filled the chamber. Every ambassador in the gallery tensed. The Morvathian actually tried to liquefy himself into the floor. Pamela Wright glanced at the weapons, looked back at Valthor, and yawned. She actually yawned. "Right. she said, pulling out a datapad and what looked like a pair of reading glasses. So, war declaration? Let me guess. You're upset about us not responding to your messages. You've decided that our silence means weakness, and you're about to give me a speech about the inevitable triumph of the Imperium over the soft, pathetic humans who don't understand real power. How am I doing so far? Valthor's mouth worked silently for a moment. This was not going according to script. The Imperium demands surrender. You will yield the Kepler colonies, open your borders to Valdrosian governance, and submit your military forces for integration into our fleets. Pamela was scrolling through her datapad, not even looking at him. And if we say no? Then we will bring the full might of the Imperium against Earth and all human holdings. We will darken your skies with our ships. We will turn your cities to ash. We will crush you so completely that the rest of the galaxy will speak of humanity only, as a cautionary tale. Right, crush us, cautionary tale, got it. She looked up from her datapad. Quick question. Did you guys do any actual research before deciding to do this? Like, any at all? Research? Valthor looked genuinely confused. Yeah, intelligence gathering. Strategic analysis. Basic due diligence. She took off her glasses and cleaned them on her sleeve. Because I'm getting the feeling that maybe you skipped that part. We have catalogued your military assets, Valthor snarled. 42 capital ships, 300 cruisers, planetary defense networks that are laughable compared to ours. We outnumber you 20-1 in tonnage alone. Okay, but see, here's where we get to the fun part. Pamela reached into her bag again and pulled out what I recognized as an actual physical newspaper. Printed on paper, like some kind of historical artifact. She unfolded it with the casual ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. This is the Sol System Times, published yesterday. Front page story. Mind if I read it to you? Valthor's confusion was palpable. What? Terraform core completes modification of Venus atmosphere, 3 months ahead of schedule. She looked up. That's the headline. Want to hear the article? I don't. Engineering teams celebrated this week as the century-long project to make Venus habitable reached its final milestone. Chief Engineer Patricia Okonkwo stated that the atmospheric processes exceeded expectations, fully converting the planet's toxic environment into a breathable atmosphere suitable for human colonization. When asked about the project's success, Okonkwo credited the advanced molecular synthesis technology developed during the War of the Three Suns, saying, quote, "We learned a lot about breaking down atmospheric composition when we had to devise weapons that could destroy entire planetary ecosystems from orbit. This was actually the easy part," unquote. Pamela folded the newspaper. Interesting, right? The silence in the throne room had changed quality. It was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of people doing very quick mental math and not liking the results. You developed weapons that could destroy planetary ecosystems? The Chixari ambassador's voice was barely a whisper. Oh, yeah, nasty business, the Three Suns War. Pamela pulled out another newspaper. Where was she keeping these? This one's from last week. Dyson sphere construction at Alpha Centauri reaches 50% completion. That's a sphere that harvests all the energy output of an entire star, in case you're not familiar. We're building it mostly because we needed somewhere to put all our industrial waste recycling operations. Turns out, when you have effectively unlimited energy, you can solve a lot of environmental problems. She reached into the bag again. How big was that thing? Oh, here's a good one. This is from a scientific journal, not a newspaper, but work with me. Advances in quantum manipulation allow for reliable FTL communication with zero latency across galactic distances. Published 3 years ago. We've had real-time communication across the entire galaxy for 3 years, and you guys are still using quantum entanglement relays that take hours to sync. Valthor had gone very still. You're lying, am I? Pamela smiled again, and this time it was worse. Tell you what, let me show you one more thing. She pulled out her datapad again and tapped a few commands. A holographic display sprang to life above it, showing what looked like a star chart. This is the galactic map, standard stuff. Here's your territory. A large swath of stars lit up in red. Impressive, right? 700 systems, lots of worlds, very intimidating. She tapped again, and a different section lit up in blue. It was smaller, maybe 200 systems. This is human space. Doesn't look like much, does it? Another tap. The blue section suddenly sprouted. Thousands of tiny connections, reaching out to systems far beyond the visible territory. These are our deep space monitoring stations. We've had eyes on every major species in the galaxy for about 40 years now. Listening posts, observation satellites, the occasional infiltration drone. The room had gone deathly quiet. These, she tapped again, and new markers appeared, are our actual military installations. See, funny thing about humans. We learned a long time ago that showing everyone your weapons is a great way to make them want to test them, so we don't. These are our ship production facilities, our weapons research stations, our strategic reserve fleets. There were hundreds of them, hidden in deep space, tucked into asteroid fields, buried in the outer reaches of unnamed systems. And these, one final tap, are the locations of our planet-killer weapons. We built them after the Three Suns War, when we realized that sometimes you need to make a very permanent statement. We've never used them, because we really don't want to. But they exist. 47 of them, each capable of cracking a planet's crust in under 6 hours. She closed the hologram and looked at Valthor. So, about that war declaration. Valthor's scales had gone completely pale, which I had never seen before. His honor guard had lowered their weapons without even realizing it. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice had lost all its authority. "Am I?" Pamela started packing her newspapers back into her bag. "Tell you what, how about you send one of your scout ships to these coordinates?" She tossed him a data chip. "That's the location of one of our shipyards. Not even a military one, just a commercial facility where we build transport vessels. Should give you a sense of our industrial capacity. Then, when you're done wetting yourself, we can have a real conversation about what happens next." She picked up her bag and took another sip of coffee. "Oh, and Valthor, one more thing." "What?" "We didn't respond to your messages because we were busy. Not scared, not intimidated, just busy. We've been dealing with some issues in the Andromeda sector, negotiating a trade dispute with the Kelron Collective, and terraforming 3 new worlds. Your little annexation of the Kepler colonies barely made page 7 of our security briefings." She turned toward the door. "But sure, if you want a war, we can make time, clear our schedule, give you our full attention." She paused at the massive doors and looked back. "Just remember, you asked for this." Then she walked out, her footsteps echoing in that vast, silent chamber. I looked at the other ambassadors. Every single one of them was staring at Valthor, waiting to see what he would do. The supreme commander of the Valdrosian Imperium, master of 700 star systems, breaker of worlds, stood frozen on his throne, holding a data chip like it might explode. And somewhere in the back of my mind a thought crystallized. Humanity had been holding back. The question was, why? 3 days later, I got summoned to an emergency session of the Imperial Council, which was hilarious because I was just an observer from the Keltharian Republic, a minor player in galactic politics, who mostly kept our heads down and tried not to get vaporized by larger empires. But apparently, every single diplomatic representative in Valdrosian space had received the same summons. Something had happened. The council chamber was different from the throne room. Smaller, which in Valdrosian terms meant it could only fit about 200 people comfortably instead of 2,000. The walls were lined with tactical displays showing fleet movements, resource allocations, and threat assessments. This was where actual decisions got made, away from the theatrical nonsense of the main palace. Valthor was already there when I arrived, and he looked terrible. His scales had that dull, greyish quality that Valdrosians got when they hadn't slept in several cycles. His eyes, normally sharp and predatory, had a haunted quality that made my survival instincts start screaming again. The other council members filed in. Admiral Krexis, who commanded the Third Fleet, General Thorin, head of ground forces, Minister Velkara, in charge of intelligence. They all had the same look, shell-shocked, terrified. When everyone was seated, Valthor gestured, and the main display activated. It showed a shipyard, or rather, what had been a shipyard before someone had apparently decided to show off. The facility was enormous. It sprawled across an area roughly the size of a small moon, with construction bays, assembly platforms, and manufacturing complexes arranged in a pattern that hurt to look at because the engineering was so far beyond anything I understood. Ships in various stages of completion filled the bays, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, but that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was the scale. The smallest vessel under construction was roughly twice the size of a Valdrosian dreadnought. The largest was so big it had its own gravitational field. I could see smaller ships orbiting it like moons. "This," Valthor said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is what we found at the coordinates the human gave us. This is a commercial shipyard. Not military. Commercial." General Thorin leaned forward. "How many facilities like this do they have?" "We don't know," Minister Velkara said, and she sounded angry about it. "Our intelligence networks have been compromised. Completely. We just discovered that 40% of our deep space monitoring stations have been feeding us fabricated data for the past 6 years. The humans have been showing us exactly what they wanted us to see." "Impossible," Admiral Krexis snarled. "Our security is flawless." "Is it?" Velkara pulled up another image. This one showed a Valdrosian officer, someone high-ranking based on the insignia. "This is Commander Ryloth. He's been on your staff for 11 years, Krexis. He's also been a human intelligence asset for the past 8. The silence that followed was deafening. "He's not human," Krexis said weakly. "No, he's Valdrosian. Born and raised in the core worlds. The humans recruited him during a diplomatic exchange." Velkara's expression was grim. "They didn't use mind control or drugs or any of the usual methods. They just talked to him, showed him what they were really like, convinced him that working with them was preferable to working against them." "How many?" Valthor asked. "We've identified 43 confirmed assets across our military and intelligence services. We suspect there are more." Velkara closed the display. "The humans have been inside our systems for nearly a decade. They know everything about us, fleet positions, weapons capabilities, strategic plans, everything." I watched Valthor's face as he processed this. For a species that had built an empire on the assumption of military superiority, this was existential terror. "What do they want?" someone asked. I think it was the Kixari ambassador, but I wasn't sure. Everyone was speaking in hushed tones now. Valthor pulled up a message on the main display. It was short, typed in standard Galactic script. "To Valthor Kree and the Valdrosian Imperial Council. We have reviewed your war declaration and find it premature. However, we understand that tensions are high, and miscommunications can lead to unfortunate outcomes. Therefore, we propose a meeting to discuss terms. Neutral territory, no weapons, just conversation. Respectfully, Pamela Wright, Human Diplomatic Service." "She wants to negotiate," General Thorin said, "after humiliating us." "No," Valthor said slowly. "She wants us to understand what negotiation actually means." He was right, of course. The humans could have destroyed us. Those planet-killer weapons Pamela had mentioned. The fleets we hadn't known about. The industrial capacity that dwarfed ours. They could have turned the Imperium into a cautionary tale within a month. But they hadn't. That was somehow more terrifying than any weapon. The meeting took place on Nexus Station, a neutral trading hub that served as a crossroads for a dozen different species. It was cramped, noisy, and smelled like a combination of exotic foods and recycled air, which made it the least threatening environment imaginable for diplomatic negotiations. Pamela Wright arrived with a small delegation. 3 other humans, all dressed in those same boring suits, all carrying the same kind of leather bags. No guards, no weapons that we could detect. They looked like accountants arriving for a quarterly review. Valthor had brought half the Imperial Council and enough security personnel to invade a small planet. The contrast was not subtle. We gathered in a conference room that had clearly seen better days. The table was scarred from years of use, the chairs were mismatched, and someone had stuck a decorative plant in the corner that was definitely dying. It was about as far from the Imperial throne room as you could get. Pamela sat down, pulled out her coffee container, and took a long sip, while Valthor and his entourage filed in and arranged themselves with military precision. "Thanks for coming," she said once everyone was settled. "I know this isn't what you're used to, but I find that fancy rooms make people stupid. All that grandeur gets in the way of actual thinking." Valthor's scales rippled, but he kept his voice level. You wish to discuss terms. I wish to discuss reality, Pamela corrected. She pulled out her datapad. Let's start with what we know. You annexed the Kepler colonies, expecting us to roll over. We didn't. You declared war, expecting us to beg for mercy. We didn't. You sent a scout ship to verify our capabilities, and now you're terrified. Yes? The bluntness was shocking. Valdrosians didn't talk like this. We danced around difficult subjects, used flowery language, maintained face at all costs. Pamela didn't care. We are not afraid, Valthor said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sure you are. It's okay. Fear is rational when you've just discovered that the species you were about to go to war with could erase you from existence without breaking a sweat. She leaned back in her chair. But here's the thing. We don't want to erase you. We don't even want to fight you. We want something much more radical. What? We want you to be better. The confusion on Valthor's face was almost comical. What? Pamela set down her coffee and folded her hands on the table. The Valdrosian Imperium has been playing the same game for 300 years. Conquer, expand, subjugate, repeat. You've built an empire on fear and violence, and it's worked because everyone else in this part of the galaxy is playing the same game, just not as well as you. She pulled up a holographic display. It showed the Imperium's territory, but with overlays I hadn't seen before. Economic data, resource flows, population, statistics. But here's what you haven't noticed. Your empire is dying, not from external threats, from internal rot, Valthor bristled. How dare you? Shut up and listen, Pamela said. And somehow she said it without raising her voice or sounding angry. She just said it, and Valthor actually shut up. Your conquered worlds are productivity sinks. You extract resources, but you don't invest in infrastructure. You demand tribute, but you don't build economies. You maintain control through fear, but fear doesn't innovate. It doesn't create. It just survives. She highlighted several systems in red. These 12 worlds are on the verge of rebellion. Not because they hate you, though they do. Because their economies have collapsed, their populations are starving, and they have nothing left to lose. You'll crush the rebellions, because you're good at that. But then 3 more worlds will start planning their own uprisings, because the problem isn't the rebels. It's the system. Minister Velkara leaned forward. And you have a solution? We have a different model. Pamela pulled up another display, this one showing human territory. We don't conquer, we integrate. Species that join humanity do so voluntarily, and they keep their autonomy. We invest in their infrastructure, share technology, build trade networks. They prosper, we prosper. Everyone wins. That's naive, General Thorin scoffed. Species act in their own self-interest. Without force, they'll betray you. They act in their own self-interest, Pamela agreed, which is why we make it in their self-interest to cooperate. A species that's prospering has no reason to rebel. A species that's starving and oppressed has every reason. She closed the displays and looked at Valthor directly. Here's what we're offering. The Kepler colonies stay independent. You withdraw your forces, issue a formal apology, and pay reparations. In exchange, we'll help you restructure your empire into something sustainable. Help us? Valthor's voice dripped with sarcasm. How generous. It is, actually. Pamela's expression hardened, because the alternative is, we do nothing. We watch your empire collapse under its own weight over the next 50 years. We watch billions die in rebellions and civil wars. We watch the power vacuum destabilize this entire sector. And then we sweep in and pick up the pieces. The room went very quiet. But that would be a waste, Pamela continued. A waste of life, a waste of resources, a waste of potential. The Valdrosian people aren't evil. Your culture has produced incredible art, advanced science, and complex philosophy. You're just locked into a system that brings out the worst in you instead of the best. She stood up and started pacing, her coffee in hand. So here's the deal. You start treating your conquered worlds like partners instead of slaves. You invest in them. You give them representation in your government. You build an empire based on cooperation instead of fear. And we'll help. Technology transfers, economic aid, educational exchanges. We'll even help you defend against external threats if needed. And if we refuse? Valthor asked. Then we go back to our space, put you on the watch list, and wait for the inevitable collapse. When it happens, We'll make sure the chaos doesn't spread beyond your borders. But we won't lift a finger to help you." Pamela took a sip of coffee. "Your choice." Admiral Crexis slammed a fist on the table. "This is blackmail." "No," Pamela said calmly. "Blackmail would be if we threatened to destroy you unless you complied. We're not threatening anything. We're offering you a chance to survive and thrive. You're welcome to refuse. Lots of empires have. Most of them don't exist anymore." She sat back down and pulled out a data chip. "This contains a detailed proposal. Economic restructuring plans, constitutional reform templates, case studies from other species that successfully transitioned from conquest-based to cooperation-based systems. Read it. Think about it. Talk to your people." Valthor stared at the chip like it might explode. "You're serious?" "Deadly serious." Pamela's expression softened slightly. "Look, I get it. This isn't what you expected. You thought you'd show up, wave your fleet around, and we'd fall in line like everyone else. Instead, you found out we could crush you, and that's terrifying. But the really terrifying thing, the thing that should keep you up at night, is that we're offering you something better than fear. We're offering you hope." She stood and gathered her things. "You have 2 months to make a decision. After that, we withdraw the offer and proceed with contingency plans. I really, really hope you make the right choice." The human delegation filed out, leaving us all sitting in stunned silence. I looked at Valthor. The supreme commander of the Valdrosian Imperium, master of 700 star systems, breaker of worlds, looked smaller somehow, diminished. "What do we do?" Minister Velkara asked quietly. Valthor picked up the data chip and turned it over in his hands. "We read the proposal. And then?" "And then," Valthor said slowly, "we decide if we want to be an empire that's remembered for what it conquered, or a civilization that's remembered for what it built." 6 weeks later, the Valdrosian Imperium announced sweeping reforms. The subjugated worlds would receive representation in a new federal council. Economic investment programs would replace tribute extraction. A constitutional convention would be convened to establish rights and protections for all species within the Imperium. The announcement sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Other empires watched nervously, wondering if their own subject worlds would start demanding similar treatment. Humanity, characteristically, released a brief statement congratulating the Valdrosian people on their bold steps toward a brighter future, offered technical assistance with transition, and then went back to whatever they were doing before this whole mess started. I filed my report with the Keltharian Republic, trying to explain what I had witnessed. The humans weren't conquerors. They weren't even really diplomats in the traditional sense. They were gardeners. They found civilizations that were sick, dying, choking on their own worst impulses, and they offered them a chance to grow into something better. Not through force, not through manipulation. Through honest assessment, practical assistance, and the terrifying knowledge that they could destroy you, but would rather help you instead. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Pamela Wright, sipping her coffee in that ridiculous conference room, calmly dismantling an empire with newspapers and spreadsheets. Humanity had been holding back, I had realized in that throne room. Now I understood why. They weren't afraid of war, they were afraid of winning it. Because once you've developed weapons that can crack planets, once you've built fleets that can darken skies, once you've accumulated the power to reshape entire civilizations, the real challenge isn't defeating your enemies. It's choosing not to. The humans had learned something that most galactic empires never figured out. Real power wasn't the ability to destroy, it was the ability to destroy and choosing to build instead. And that, more than any weapon or fleet or technological marvel, was what made them truly terrifying. Because you can fight an empire that wants to conquer you. You can resist an enemy that wants to destroy you. But how do you fight someone who genuinely wants to help you become better than you are? 3 months after the meeting on Nexus Station, I received a message from Pamela Wright. Brief, friendly, asking how things were going in the Keltharian Republic and whether we'd be interested in discussing some trade agreements and cultural exchanges. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I smiled, poured myself a drink, and started composing a reply. Because if you can't beat them, and you can't join them in being terrible, you might as well join them in being better. And honestly, after watching an empire fall apart and rebuild itself in the span of a few months, better sounded pretty good.